What if the most explosive story of the 20th century had never happened? Imagine a Russian empire that never collapsed in flames, where the red flag was never raised. What if the blood of 1917 had been contained, and the world had never known the word Soviet? Every step taken on the streets of Petrograd, every cry of a starving worker, every whisper conspiracy, all of it simply erased. But what would have become of the planet without the Russian Revolution? Would we have escaped even more brutal wars, or plunged into an abyss far deeper? Close your eyes and feel the cold of the Russian winter. The snow covers the sidewalks, but also the truths. Beneath the surface, hunger corrodes, inequality pulses. Real history tells us that this empire, ruled by iron-fisted tsars, was doomed. But what if the spark had never been lit? In reality, in February 1917, the Russian people, exhausted by war and misery, rose against Tsar Nicholas II. The regime collapsed like a house of cards. Months later, in October, the Bolsheviks seized power, planting the seeds of the Soviet Union. From that uprising came decades of Cold War, nuclear rivalry, and a world divided into blocs. But what if everything had been different? Imagine a Russia where Nicholas II never abdicates, where the army, hardened by the First World War, crushes the protests, where the Bolsheviks are silenced before they can even raise their banners. What would it mean to live in a century without Lenin, without Stalin, without the Red Terror? The air grows heavier as this possibility takes shape. Perhaps Germany would have faced no ideological barriers in Eastern Europe. Perhaps the Second World War would have taken on an even more devastating form. Or perhaps there would have been no war at all. Who dares to predict? This is the invitation, to walk through a world where the impossible becomes real, where history, this living creature, breathes different winds and forces us to confront profound dilemmas. If the Russian Revolution had never happened, would the very idea of social justice, of class struggle, have vanished, or merely changed its face, waiting for another chance to be born? Prepare to cross this portal of shadows and questions. Nothing will be simple. Nothing will be certain. But one thing is undeniable. After hearing this story, you will never see the 20th century the same way again. If you also want to explore the secrets of what if, subscribe now to the channel. Here, every video is a journey into a parallel universe of history where nothing is impossible. And this is only the beginning. The code of Imperial Russia still guards its secrets. In the next part, we will see how an empire that refuses to fall could shape an entire planet. The streets of Petrograd still reek of coal and fear. But in this alternate universe, the footsteps of the crowd are silenced before their cries can become revolution. Tsar Nicholas II, cornered and standing on the edge of collapse, does not hesitate. He summons the army, declares martial law, and turns the capital into a field of silence. Soldiers with bayonets patrol every street corner. Hunger remains. The cold remains. But the hope of toppling the crown evaporates. No workers' councils. No soldiers' committees. The Bolsheviks, seen as forward agitators, are hunted like wolves. Lenin, still in exile, hears of mass arrests and realizes his return is impossible. A single act of repression changes the heartbeat of the century. Europe watches with wide eyes. Germany, counting on Russia's collapse to ease the Eastern Front of the Great War, now faces an enemy more unified than ever. Without the February Revolution, the Tsar remains on the throne. The Imperial Army, still bleeding but unbroken, resists German offensives. What if that prolonged resistance dragged the war on for years more? How many more lives will be consumed by fire? Inside Russia, tension coils like a serpent. Peasants still without land. Workers still without bread. The Tsar's repression acts as a stopper, but not a cure. The churches preach obedience, while the Okhrana, the feared secret police, listens to every whispered word in the taverns. It is a nation frozen, not by snow, but by fear. And the rest of the world? Without a socialist revolution to terrify the powerful, workers' movements in Western Europe lose strength. No red beacon-inspired strikes in Berlin, Paris, or Chicago. The ideals of equality are pushed back into darkness, while social democracy, just beginning to emerge in many countries, finds its doors locked. But What if this silence only fueled an even greater fury? In this scenario, the 20th century becomes a stage of contradictions. A Russian empire that refuses to fall makes room for unexpected alliances. Shaky monarchies across Europe see in it both a mirror and a shield. And without the Soviet Union as a declared enemy, the balance of power shifts in unpredictable directions. Imagine a future where communism never rises as a global force, but the exploitation of the masses continues, raw and unchecked. Would capitalism, without an ideological rival, grow even more ruthless or collapse under its own weight, without the red fear forcing concessions? The winter of 1917 drags on, along with a rain of iron, but beneath the ice, the earth stirs. Something inevitable pulses in the underground of history, like a volcano waiting to erupt, because no human force, no matter how brutal, can forever suppress hunger, inequality, and a desire for change. In the next chapter, we will see how this hardened empire, by surviving, reshapes the First World War and sparks conflicts in places we would never imagine. And you, would you dare predict the price of this new century? The year is 1918. In our real world, the trenches were beginning to fall silent. But in this alternate universe, the war stretches on like an open wound. With Imperial Russia still standing, the Eastern Front remains alive. Germany cannot shift its troops westward. The Kaiser's empire is forced to divide its forces, and each battle becomes an endless drain of blood. The snows of Poland, Galicia, and Ukraine are stained red. Every winter brings new offensives. Hunger stalks soldiers and civilians alike. The sound of artillery echoes like a thunder that never ceases. And while the world waits for an armistice, Russia stands as a stubborn giant, refusing peace. The United States, which in real history entered the war to shorten it, now finds itself in a conflict with no horizon. Resources, lives, hopes, all stretched into a marathon of attrition. And the question suffocating Washington, Paris, and London is simple. How do you negotiate peace when the Tsar refuses to surrender even an inch? But the internal cost is devastating. In Russian villages, mothers bury their sons in shallow graves. Grain fails to arrive, plague spread, anger grows. And still, Nicholas II's iron hand does not tremble. He believes keeping the war alive is the only way to preserve his crown, a decision that makes him a prisoner of his own throne. Across Europe, the consequences explode. Without the Treaty of Versailles to humiliate Germany, the same flame of resentment that fueled Nazism never ignites. But another kind of radicalism rises. Authoritarian movements, not draped in swastikas, but in cross and crown, calling for order and tradition. Is this a more peaceful future, or merely a new form of tyranny? Meanwhile, the idea of global socialism withers. Without the Soviet beacon, communist parties in France, Italy, and Spain lose momentum. Workers continue to suffer, but see no victorious example to inspire them. Strikes grow timid. Employers grow merciless. And capitalism, without an ideological enemy, grows into a beast without chains. But Russia's ice is not eternal. Inside the barracks, young officers whisper in secret. They see their homeland bleeding. They see their brothers dying. And they ask, how much longer? Every starving soldier is a ticking bomb. Every peasant without bread is a fuse. What Nicholas does not see is that by crushing the revolution of 1917, he has only delayed it, making it far more savage. And the question echoes like distant thunder. Did the Tsar save his empire, or only push it toward an even more devastating explosion? In the next chapter, we journey into the 1920s of this alternate world, where an exhausted empire struggles to rise again, while global powers conspire in the shadows. What is born from a century where revolution was smothered, but fury never died? The war finally drags itself to an armistice in 1921. It is not victory. It is not peace. It is only exhaustion. The trenches fall silent not through honorable agreements, but because there is nothing left to give. The Russian Empire, still intact on the map, is a body covered in scars. Broken factories, devastated fields, millions of dead. The imperial cities, Moscow, Petrograd, Kiev, breathe an air of misery so thick it can almost be touched. Tsar Nicholas II Aged and paranoid, rules from palaces that have become golden prisons. In the streets, the murmurs are muted. There are no Soviets, no organized Bolsheviks, only hunger and anger. The people no longer shout in crowds. They whisper, and that whisper, invisible, is more dangerous than any red flag. Europe, meanwhile, watches with unease. Without a Soviet Union to fear, the colonial empires breathe easier for now. But Russia's instability is a slow poison. Germany, humiliated only by fatigue and not by treaties, seeks new paths to power. France, Britain, and the United States compete for every market and every resource like starving wolves. At the heart of Russia, dilemmas multiply. The nobility demands privilege. The peasants demand land. The army officers demand pay and dignity. Each group pulls at a rope that threatens to snap the old order. Nicholas tries to rule with an iron hand, but rust corrodes a crown. And what if socialism, crushed in 1917, now returned as a fiercer ghost? Without visible leaders, the underground revolt forms from anonymous cells. Hybrid ideologies. It is not Lenin's Marxism. It is something more chaotic, more unpredictable. A hunger for rupture that fits into no book and no manifesto. Meanwhile, the rest of the world follows an equally uncertain path. Without the red fear to restrain them, Western industrialists accelerate exploitation. Strikes are crushed. Unions lose their voice. The rich grow richer. The poor fade into invisibility. And a bitter question creeps in. Does the absence of the Soviet Union make capitalism more humane or infinitely more brutal? On the eastern frontier, Japan advances silently. China, without the shock of a communist neighbor, remains fragmented and vulnerable. The Pacific becomes a board of ambitions. And without the Soviet counterweight, who will stop the rise of an even bolder Japanese empire, inside the Winter Palace, Nicholas feels history's breath on his neck. Every night is a nightmare. Echoes of gunfire, imagined crowds, ghosts of a future he could not kill. He believes he has defeated the revolution, but in truth, he has only transformed it into something impossible to control. In the next chapter, we journey into the 1930s of this distorted universe, when Russia, tired of kings and wars, becomes a stage for a new kind of ambition. A shadow rises, unknown, undefined. An entire world unaware marches toward a clash that will rewrite the very idea of power. The 1930s arrive with a cold heavier than the Russian winter. The empire, still alive, is a sick body. The fields have not recovered. The factories hum with rusted silence. The people work, yet hunger remains. There are no red flags, only pale faces, hollow eyes, and a silence that seems to scream. Nicholas II, now an old man, walks through the palace corridors like a crowned ghost. He believes he has defeated the revolution, but he has only defeated its form, never its essence. His children, raised in pomp and fear, cannot grasp the weight of the streets. While Europe flirts with authoritarian regimes, Mussolini in Italy, nationalist movements everywhere, Russia remains a cracked monolith. And into this void, a new figure begins to rise. Not Lenin, not Stalin, but an obscure general, forged in endless trenches and battles without glory. A man who knows war better than politics, yet sees in chaos the chance to become a myth. His name does not yet echo, but his allies multiply in the shadows. He does not speak of communism or czarism. He speaks of redemption. He promises to restore Russian pride, without thrones, without manifestos. A speech made of steel, order, and vengeance against the West that bled Russia for decades. A promise as seductive as it is deadly. The world, distracted, does not see it. The United States is consumed by the Great Depression. Germany struggles to rise from its endless war. But without the resentment of Versailles, Nazism does not find the same fertile ground. At least not in the same way. Britain and France, exhausted, chase trade deals to save their colonial empires. And no one looks toward the awakening giant in the east. But hunger is impatient. Peasant rebellions erupt in distant provinces. Generals divide their loyalties between the imperial family and the new promise of strength. Each clash, each protest, each shot fired in a remote village is another step toward an inevitable coup. Imagine a Russia leaping from a dying throne straight into a military dictatorship of global reach, without communism to restrain it, without democracy to temper it, only steel and gunpowder. Would the 20th century, without the Soviet Union, fall into the hands of an even more relentless military empire? Or would the world, weary of war, unite to contain it? The winter of 1936 brings an omen: a failed assassination against a czarist minister, explosions in Petrograd, rumors of mass desertions in the army. Foreign newspapers try to ignore it, but in Russia's frozen backstreets, everyone knows. The ground trembles. The Tsar's throne will not fall to ideology, but to bayonets. And when the first flame ignites, no one will be able to predict how far the fire will spread. In the next chapter, we will see how this new man of iron reveals himself to the world, and how his rise reshapes not only Russia, but the destiny of entire continents. The 20th century, without the hammer and sickle, may be about to face something even darker. Early 1937. The wind cuts like a blade over the golden domes of Petrograd. The city seems to hold its breath. Suddenly, a series of explosions echoes through the workers' districts. Flames light up the night, as if the very sky were bleeding. It is the signal many feared and others had long awaited. From the rubble emerges the figure that foreign newspapers will soon call the Iron Man. His name, Viktor Malenkov, a general almost unknown outside the barracks. Among his soldiers, however, he is legend, a veteran of the most brutal fronts, a cold strategist, with no loyalty to the imperial family nor to the dead ideals of socialism. His manifesto is simple, and for that very reason hypnotic: order, honor, end of Russian humiliation. While Nicholas II hesitates, surrounded by counselors whispering contradictions, Malenkov advances. Within weeks, entire garrisons swear allegiance to the new leader. The same army that once crushed the revolution now turns its weapons on the throne itself. The nobility, blinded by fear, believes they will be able to control him, but the Iron Man serves no one. Europe watches, uneasy. With no Soviet bloc to fear, diplomats underestimate what they see. He is just another general, they say in London, Paris, and Washington. But each day brings a new decree: total censorship, military tribunals, nationalization of industries in the name of national strength. It is not communism. It is a nationalism of steel, a war machine that feeds on silence. And the people? Some cheer, weary of the Tsar's empty promises. Others tremble, remembering past oppressions. But no one can stop the advance. When the imperial family tries to flee, it is already too late. Nicholas II, the man who buried the revolution, is deposed without glory, a prisoner of the very history he once distorted. The world changes tone. Japan, already expanding, wonders, ally or rival. Germany, without Hitler's Nazism but still hungry for power, sees in Malenkov a partner to divide Eastern Europe. The United States, deep in economic recovery, sees a dangerous enigma. And at the heart of Russia, Malenkov begins something the 20th century in our world never knew. An empire built not on ideology, but on sheer force. He does not promise equality. He does not speak of revolution. He promises only that Russia will become the blade that cuts the world. Could this be the true nightmare history tried to avoid? Without communism, without social capitalism, only steel, fear, and conquest, winter advances. Military trains depart toward forgotten borders. New factories rise like fortresses of smoke. It is the sound of an empire reborn not through ideals, but through pure ambition. In the next chapter, we will see how Malenkov's Russia challenges both Western and Eastern powers, reshaping alliances and threatening to ignite a conflict that can engulf the entire planet. The 20th century, without the red of the sickle, may be about to drown in a far deadlier shade of gray. While real Europe prepares for World War II, this alternate universe twists into something even more unpredictable. There is no Hitler, no Stalin. There is Viktor Malenkov, the Iron Man, and his empire throbbing like a starving beast. Germany, weary yet spared the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, clings to its fragile republic. But Malenkov watches the West with predator's eyes. He needs no ideological excuse. only territory, resources, glory. If the world does not fear Russia, he declares in speeches broadcast by newly seized radios, then the world will not survive Russia. In the east, Japan advances through China, dreaming of a Pacific empire. Malenkov sees an opportunity. He sends secret envoys to Tokyo, offering deals no historian in our world could ever imagine. Two military empires, one Euro-Asian, the other Asian, begin to whisper alliances. The planet holds its breath, blind to the abyss opening beneath it. Inside Russia, life becomes a forced march. Factories run day and night, powered not by ideals, but by fear. Every worker is a soldier without a uniform. Every city, a fortress. The cult of personality grows. Posters show Malenkov wrapped in steel and snow, a father of iron who never ages. And the West? The United States, focused on climbing out of the Great Depression, hesitates. Britain and France, lacking the explicit threat of Nazism, underestimate Russia. They believe Malenkov seeks only stability. But the convoys of tanks rolling through the Baltics tell another story. Philosophy, morality, even the very idea of the future bends. Without the Soviet experiment to inspire social movements, capitalism grows unchecked. Strikes are crushed in silence. Democracies weaken before corporations that learn to govern without fear of revolution. It is a world where freedom becomes currency, and those who cannot pay cannot breathe. At the heart of Russia, children are raised for war. In schools, maps show not borders, but zones of inevitable conquest. Scientists, once exiled or persecuted, now receive limitless resources, so long as they serve the war machine. The race for new weapons, chemical, mechanical, perhaps nuclear, accelerates. With no ideology to restrain or justify, only the cold logic of power remains. And the question that crosses continents rises. Is a world without communism truly safer? Or have we merely handed the planet to a predator without face, without cause, without limits? The nights of 1940 bring signs. Reports of Russian troops massing near Poland, warships in the Arctic. Unidentified planes flying over Scandinavia. The coming winter is not only of snow, it is a winter of gunpowder. In the next and final chapter, we will see whether the century of shadow ends in a war that consumes the world, or in a silence deadlier than any bomb. In this universe, the choice may not be between ideologies, but between the survival of humanity itself. The entire planet seems to hold its breath. There are no clear fronts, no binding treaties, only the sense that something immense is about to break. Viktor Malenkov, now called the Iron Tsar, rules an empire stretching from the Baltic to the Pacific. His presence is a shadow covering both maps and minds. Russian warships cross the Arctic in deadly silence. Troops mass on the borders of Poland, Finland, Turkey. In every speech, Malenkov does not threaten. He simply declares, as if the future already belongs to him. The century is Russia's or will belong to no one. It is more than prophecy. It is a verdict. In the West, leaders waver between disbelief and fear. Without a Hitler to unite the world against an obvious evil, alliances form and dissolve in secrecy. The United States attempts desperate diplomacy, but knows the ocean is no longer a shield. Britain, isolated, realizes its colonies cannot contain an empire that needs no justification. Inside Russia, life becomes almost ritualistic. Children learn war songs before they learn to read. Entire cities train to resist sieges that may never come. Military science devours unimaginable resources. Rumors spread of weapons that burn the air, machines that could split the atom, dark legends that feel too real. And amid it all, an impossible question emerges. Has humanity, without the clash of ideologies, without the struggle between capitalism and communism, been doomed to an even crueler fate? Perhaps the absence of the Russian Revolution did not bring peace, but birthed a faceless predator, feeding only on power. By 1942, what historians in our world call the Second World War takes another shape. It is not a war of flags, but of survival. Russia and Japan sign a pact of steel, carving up Pacific and Eastern Europe as if they were pieces of a cruel game. The United States, Britain, France, and a still uncertain Germany realize, too late, that they must unite or vanish. But Malenkov is no longer just a man. He is a symbol, a machine, the echo of a decision in 1917 that never happened. A void of ideals transformed into the most dangerous force of all, power for the sake of power. And here, in this universe where the Russian Revolution was strangled in its cradle, the future is a horizon of gray. No sickle, no hammer, no Nazi eagle. Only the metallic sound of armies marching with no cause beyond the march itself. Perhaps, somewhere far ahead in time, another spark may ignite, a new dream of equality, a rebellion still without a name. But for now, history is a shattered mirror. The absence of revolution has not brought order. It has brought perfect chaos, the kind that needs no flag, only silence to feed upon. And we, observers of this world that might have been, must confront the question that never fades. What if the true catastrophe was not the revolution, but its absence? Did you enjoy this journey into a universe where history followed another path? Then share this video and subscribe to What If History. Every week, we open a new door to worlds that could have existed and that may still breathe within the choices we make today.